When my mom was in high school, she took an exam to be accepted into the engineering program, and she ranked 98th out in the 98th percentile out of the entire country. And whenever she showed up for class the first day, she realized she was the only girl, and she turned around and changed her schedule immediately. It's very scary to be the only person in a room that looks like you. It's very scary to be alone. But that was the 90s, and surely things have changed by now, right? But sadly, that's not the case. There is a large gap between women and men in many areas. And one of those areas would be in the workplace with um, higher level representation for lower level women employees. To quote Judith Warner from the Center for American Progress, although the United States ranked first in women's educational attainment, it ranked 19th in women's economic participation and opportunity and 96th in women's political empowerment. So, I'm going to begin with some statistics on women in positions of power, and then I'm going to tell you about some reasons why there are more men than women in executive positions, and then I'm going to give you some ways on how to fight that gap. So, to fully understand this crisis, you must be well informed on what the problem is, on why it is happening, and how you can take steps to fix it. So, let's begin. Women are 61% of accountants and auditors, but only 12.5% of chief financial officers. Very large gap. Women are 57 earn 57% of all undergraduate degrees, 59% of all master's degrees, and a majority of doctorate degrees. But they are only 32% of full professors and 30% of college presidents. And over here, women are 50% of the population, but they only hold 18% of governorships in the United States. So, this representation is pitiful. There's huge gaps between the numbers of women in that field, in that category, and their higher level representation. There is massive gaps. And that's just unacceptable. How can you fully represent a person if you are not like them? If you don't know their side of life? So why are these numbers so low? Why is there such a big gap? But I asked a couple of people, and I'll give you some of the reasons that they gave me. One, because they're generally less qualified or less educated than men, and that's just how it is. They don't pursue very many college degrees. Well, as you can see here, that's false. Women earn a majority of college degrees. And then they said, the stress of being an executive and having a family is too much for women. Women are more family-oriented. Well, that's not according to a study done in the summer of 2019 by Stanford Social Innovation Review. That concluded that men were actually more unhappy with the demands of work because it cut into their family life. So if it's not because they're underqualified, and it's not because it's too stressful on their family, then why? People actually don't want to admit that American culture is still subtly sexist. And there's a way of thinking that women are more family-oriented than men, and that thinking is very toxic to both men and women. But it's so deeply ingrained in our culture that it's hard to overcome those internal biases. So as I suggested with the story of my mother in a high school, it's discouraging to be the only woman in a field made up of mainly men, which further adds to the problem. So even though it's the 21st century, American culture dictates that men are the breadwinners and men are executives, which shouldn't be the case. Although now that thinking has improved greatly, but it's far from perfect. And that's where my next point comes in. How can we, as a society, close this gap and make representation equal for everyone, or at least more equal? So it starts with keeping yourself informed on the upper levels of representation in your own workplace, and also in politics. From there, we need to hold corporations accountable for their hiring practices. Corporations themselves could do a blind hiring process, which eliminates their knowledge of a person's gender, and thus prevent gender bias. We also need to hold ourselves accountable for using our right to vote and to vote in representatives that share our values. But perhaps the biggest thing that we can do as a society is teach young children, and especially young girls, that they should never settle for anything less than what they deserve or anything less than what is right. My mom always taught me that I can do anything that I set my mind to, and that's something that we need to instill in more children today, and especially more girls. So, from what I've told you about the representation for women in politics and women in executive leadership, it is obvious that we need to bridge the gap between men and women. So, I told you what the gap is with these statistics. I informed you on why there is a gap, and I showed you some steps we can take to fix it. So please keep yourself informed, hold corporations accountable, and teach children to never settle for something that isn't right. If we do nothing about this problem, it might correct itself in 60 or 70 years, but who wants to wait that long for equality when you can have it now?